All right, let's dive right in. What if I told you that the story we've all learned about our universe, the 13.8 billion year timeline, wasn't a scientific discovery at all, but maybe a cover-up? Today, we are opening the case file on a document that puts cosmic time itself on trial. So buckle up, because this isn't just an explainer, it's a full-blown forensic audit of reality.
Right out of the gate, this document drops an absolute bombshell of a claim. It says that the 13.8 billion year story is a theological coup. The argument here is that this massive timescale isn't some hard scientific fact. No, it's a mathematical story, a construct, specifically designed to dodge what the author calls the terrifying implications of a directed origin. This one sentence really sets the stage for a radical teardown of the entire cosmological model we know.
So, first up in the courtroom, the indictment. We're going to see how the prosecution, let's call it, plans to deconstruct the standard model piece by piece, starting at its very foundation. The first major charge is something the document calls the foundational crime, and it's all about the difference between two kinds of science. On one hand, you've got operational science, stuff you can repeat in a lab with controlled experiments, real testable science. But then you have historical science, which tries to figure out what happened in a past you can't observe or repeat. The source argues that this historical kind of science is mathematically degenerate. What does that mean? Well, it means there are just too many unknowns, too many variables, to ever land on one single certain answer. So to claim lab-level certainty for deep time, the document calls that a fraudulent bait and switch. Okay, Exhibit A. The audit points to this massive, gaping hole in the standard model. Get this, to make all the math work, cosmologists had to invent dark matter and dark energy. These are things that, by the way, have never been directly observed, and yet they supposedly make up 95% of everything. The document calls them the secular ghosts, a 95% fudge factor that's just there to keep the whole model from falling apart. As it points out, in pretty much any other field, a 95% margin of error would be called fraud. So if that 95% isn't a fudge factor, what is it? Well, this is where the document offers its own explanation, and it reframes the whole dark sector using concepts from Kabbalah. It suggests these gravitational effects aren't missing matter at all. Instead, they're like shadows or artifacts being cast into our dimension from a higher dimensional reality, what Kabbalah calls Sublime Sefiros or a surrounding light. Think of it as the system overhead for running a much, much more complex creation than we can see. And now for Exhibit B. Cosmic inflation. The audit calls this a secular deus ex machina, basically a convenient, out-of-nowhere plot device to save the story. See, to fix some major problems in the Big Bang Theory, scientists came up with this idea of a one-time, unprovable event right at the beginning, where the universe supposedly expanded faster than the speed of light, breaking all the known laws of physics, and then, just as conveniently, it stopped. The document finds a deep irony here, and I'm quoting, "The atheist is perfectly willing to believe in a supernatural, law-breaking event, provided it is an accident. He does not hate the miracle. He hates the miracle maker." All right, so the indictment now pivots from the theories to the actual physical evidence. The argument here is that the clocks themselves, the methods we use to measure deep time, are fundamentally broken, and that the forensic evidence has been completely contaminated. The audit lays out a series of specific charges against our so-called radiometric clocks. For example, there's the helium retention paradox, which points out there's way too much helium trapped in certain crystals for them to be billions of years old. It calls potassium-argon dating a leaky cage, prone to creating illusions of great age. The document even claims that inconvenient dates often get tossed out if they don't fit the expected timeline. And finally, it accuses carbon-14 dating of being a parasitic loop, where different dating methods are just calibrated against each other in a circle instead of against some real fixed objective standard. Now, to wrap up the case against the standard model, the audit points to two huge crises happening in cosmology right now. First, the Hubble tension. This is a major disagreement among scientists about exactly how fast the universe is expanding. They have two different measurements, and they don't line up at all. And second, there are the James Webb Telescope's discoveries of red monsters. These are galaxies way out in the early universe that are just impossibly grown up. They seem to have formed stars hundreds of times faster than the standard model says is even possible. So after this total forensic demolition of deep time, the document says we're at an impasse. Physics can't give us the answer. If all our tools for reconstructing the past are fundamentally flawed, the question becomes, what kind of evidence can we actually trust?
And this is the major turning point in the whole argument. The audit says, since the laboratory has totally failed us, we have to leave the lab behind. It's time to enter the courtroom, where a totally different kind of evidence reigns supreme: testimony. The document proposes we need to consider a completely new type of data: testimony. It argues that real chronological certainty doesn't come from math or trying to reconstruct the past. Instead, it has to be anchored in a witnessed horizon. What's that? It's a public historical event seen by an entire people where the normal laws of physics were openly ruptured. And who is the star witness in this cosmic court case? It's not one person. It's an entire nation. The core of their testimony describes something called a Thermo-Acoustic Singularity, a divine voice so powerful that it physically shattered the landscape, caused the immediate collective death of everyone present, and then they were resurrected. The document's conclusion here is pretty stark. To believe that an entire nation just invented a collective memory of its own mass death and resurrection is a psychological impossibility that's actually way bigger than the miracle itself. Okay, but you might be thinking, how can you trust a story like that over thousands of years? It sounds like a recipe for disaster. Well, the next part of the case is all about proving the integrity of that signal through what it calls an unbroken chain of custody. The audit lays out a formal 40-generation chain of custody for this national testimony, and it argues this was nothing like a game of telephone. It was way more like a modern distributed ledger technology, a blockchain, where the whole nation acted as decentralized nodes, all verifying the data. And here's the crucial part: the timestamp, the date. It wasn't just ceremonial. It was a legal necessity. For daily life, for contracts, divorces, court cases, you needed an exact, unbroken date. That legal requirement, it argues, is what secured the calendar from being corrupted over time. And to bolster the case, the audit brings in external verification from what it calls hostile nodes, basically records from enemies who had zero incentive to help this story along. For instance, the Egyptian Merneptah stele, it says, verifies Israel was a known nation at the right time. The Tel Dan stele corroborates the existence of the House of David, and the signature Prism authenticates specific geopolitical events that were described by the prophet Isaiah. So we've now heard the indictment against this standard model, and we've heard the case for testimony. The audit is moving to its closing argument, and it boils everything we've just discussed down to a fundamental choice between two competing visions of reality. And this is really what it all comes down to: a choice between two worldviews. On one side, you have the stochastic machine. This is a universe born from a random explosion, shaped by chaotic, unguided processes, where deep time itself sort of becomes a surrogate creator. And on the other side, you have the directed message, a universe that was initialized in a mature state, a direct speech act from an author, secured by a legally binding, witnessed timestamp. The document's final verdict? Well, it's completely unambiguous. When it comes to scientific validity, it declares the 13.8 billion year age a syntax error, nothing more than a mathematical mirage. And on historical veracity, it declares the witnessed 5786-year record a sovereign legal fact, backed by that unbroken chain of legal testimony. And its final statement isn't just a conclusion. It's a direct accusation. The document concludes that the secular establishment is guilty of obstruction of justice against the truth. It's a powerful, absolutely uncompromising end to its entire argument. And so, the audit leaves us with one final, very provocative question. It argues that to reject the testimony, you have to believe in something else. A silent, multi-generational conspiracy theory where millions of parents somehow successfully brainwash their own children into believing a completely fabricated memory of mass death. So the document forces a choice. Which one requires more faith? A legally preserved, verified chain of custody, or a conspiracy theory of truly impossible scale? The verdict is yours.